A bit on the operating model about data function as well, because that is something I wanted to pick up. Because all the IT functions, right? Historically, now it's not only data function. Well, you take any IT function, historically have largely been very central functions, right? Yeah, central data teams, central architecture teams, centralized security teams, etc. They would deliver services to rest of the business. That's how the historic operating model was. But the broader IT operating models are now changing. There are new patterns emerging where you're talking about more federated operating models, where part of the IT functions are being embedded into other parts of the business to allow them more autonomy, etc. Right? How do you see data function from that operating model perspective evolving? What patterns are emerging, and maybe pros and cons of some of the patterns as well?
Yeah, it's certainly an area that's been evolving, Sumitra, as you've seen as well. Look, I think uh, what we are starting to see increasingly work well is the emergence of empowered end-to-end teams, within an operating model. So traditionally, we've had a clear distinction and separation between business and IT teams and data functions and the data warehouse team sits separately from the data analytics team and the reporting teams, etc. So now, I think increasingly what we are seeing is that uh, end-to-end teams that are empowered to deliver business outcomes tend to achieve more, and that model tends to work better than the traditional model where there are a lot of handoffs. Um, but it's important to have awareness around the outcome and clarity for the teams around the outcome that is being delivered there. Otherwise, traditionally what's happened is people have become almost slaves to to the funding question, to how we structured and the constraints that we've had, and people try to do the best that they can within the constraints that they have, and that's how they've been measured, right? But I think you get the best outcomes, and increasingly we're seeing organizations tend towards this model where you build teams around a specific outcome, and the teams have to be therefore agile, not just in terms of how they're working day to day, but also in terms of how they're structured. Because once you deliver one outcome, then you might need to reorganize yourselves, to kind of structure around the next outcome and how to deliver that in the best possible manner. So I think the traditional models around fixed, ongoing structures, I think will start to crumble as we move forward. It will become more and more flatter structures where teams are more and more getting, the autonomy and empowerment to self-organize around outcomes, and then they measured on the outcomes that they're delivering, not just around working within specific constraints and how far they moved, etc. It's either you're achieving the outcome or you're not achieving the outcome, and therefore and one of the things that has to evolve to kind of support that model, which is a shift from the traditional models, is around how teams are measured and how they're rewarded as well, right? So, how targets are set and how people are encouraged to compete almost with each other, right? Because you have these ranking systems in organizations where people are compared against each other. So if you have to do better than someone else, then someone else has to do worse than you, by definition. So I think those models have to, and HR functions are increasingly becoming aware of that and working towards that, towards resolving that, because you want to encourage business outcomes to become the focus rather than individual performances. So, but that's a challenge that I think we've got to work closely with as leaders and as data leaders. We've got to work closely with our HR partners and solve that conundrum as well.
And in that future, do you see there will still be some centralized data team in some shape or form? And if that is the case, what could be the that centralized accountability? And then what roles and what accountability might be federated out?
I think it's not going to just all disappear. It's there's while we have truly end-to-end teams delivering, there is uh, I think the question of what sits in the business and what sits in technology, etc., becomes less relevant. However, regardless of where it's sitting, you still need to drive, a certain structure around, what is the data strategy? What is the governance framework within the teams are supposed to operate? What is the architecture and how is that going to be taken forward? What's the strategy around that? What are the controls that we're implementing? What are the policies and processes that are being put into place? I think all of those functions have to still have some lot of central ownership, because you can't just let every team decide this for yourself. You got to have you know uh, an organizational data strategy. You got to have a governance framework, policies, controls, etc., which align with the organization's risk appetite, with the strategy of the board and the strategic outcomes that the company is striving for. So I think a lot of those functions, monitoring, auditing that, putting governance around it, even though you want to have an element of self-governance, but there has to be some amount of, second level, third level functions that are auditing, governing the use of data and how these teams are working. And that's not just from a risk and security perspective, it's also from a consistency, from a continuous improvement perspective, so that we're all moving forward at the same pace and consistently as an organization. So some of those functions will still need to be driven centrally, in my view.
Let's move on and discuss